So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this Donorbox webinar. My name is Jenna, and I'm the brand ambassador for Donorbox, and I'll also be moderating this webinar today. For those of you who are not familiar with Donorbox, we provide nonprofits with simple and effective tools to manage their online fundraising activities and connect with individual donors on a deeper level. To date, we have helped over 35,000 organizations across the globe raise over $700 million. So to learn more, you can visit us on our site at donorbox.org. And today I am so excited to announce that we are joined by Jay Frost to talk about how you can land big money for your small nonprofit. Now, I have a nice introduction for Jay. Over the last 3 decades, Jay has worked to identify and pursue billions in fundraising opportunities for thousands of charitable organizations around the world. Jay is one of the leading voices in the field, trust me. He has been recognized as one of the nonprofit influencers to start following today by Donorbox. We are big fans here. One of America's top 10 fundraising experts by Philanthropic Media. One of the top 8 fundraising influencers by Elevation Media. One of the top 13 excellent fundraising consultants by Double the Donation. Hang on, I'm not done. And among the top 100 charity influencers by Analytica. Woo! Wow, that is awesome. Now, Jay has addressed hundreds of meetings in the US, UK, Canada, Asia, and the Middle East, and online. He has been described as a master of innovation and a beacon of light and inspiration whose humor-filled and thought-provoking talks, trainings, and consults leave groups energized and informed. You guys, are you ready for this? Yes. Now, I've probably gotten you all pumped up already. But before I pass the baton over to Jay, I just want to mention a couple of items. Please note that this webinar presentation will be about 45 minutes long with an additional 10 minutes at the end allotted for Q&A. This webinar is being recorded, do not worry. We will send you a link for this after the webinar has ended, so you can keep an eye out for that in your email. Now, you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner that you have a chat box. I see that most of you are utilizing that already. Please feel free to drop your questions within this chat box throughout the presentation, and we will mark these so that we can answer them at the end. And you will also notice some polls pop up and some links that will be in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Click those and they will open right up. Okay, without further ado, everybody, please give Jay a very warm welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Passing the baton over to you.
Trying to catch it desperately. Thank you, Jenna. You are the best host I've ever encountered. I mean that.
We're very excited to have you.
Trading, compliments, things. You really are. Exceptional team at Donorbox, and I'm delighted to be here. And really excited to see the people, yes, she is, who are saying hello from all over the place, from literally 22 miles away from my house, all the way to the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, and it seems like everywhere in between. I have a lot of slides today which are focused on some of the ways that you can identify donors in the United States. I will definitely try to adjust some of that during our conversation, so some of you who are working around the world, who can definitely do research too, can try and benefit from this presentation. But I want to tell you in advance that I have a whole slide deck and lots of content on doing this work globally. So if you'd like to talk about that offline, you'll see my contact information at the end. I'm happy to talk about that at any time with you in any way you want. It's true that I am a consultant, but you need not fear that. I spend a lot of my time just talking with people because I love this work. My greatest passion, and it's not always profitable, is to be able to talk with people who are changing lives and saving lives. That for each of you, it's the same thing. You wouldn't be doing this work if it wasn't for the ability to do that in some small measure. So the way I get to do that is by talking with people in settings like this or one-on-one. So feel free to reach out to me afterwards if I haven't covered something you want to talk about, or if you just want to shoot ideas around with one another. So hello, everybody, including from Liberia. I mean, this is an awesome, awesome group. Now, I'm going to see if I can advance these slides. And, oh, that's to leave the stage. So, there we go. Found it. Jenna doesn't have to save me yet. So, I want to start with this image, and this will be more familiar to people who walk the streets of the United States than it will be to maybe some others, but you will see something like it in virtually every corner of the world, whether it's a small bucket or a boot or something else where people are raising money for causes that they care about. Whether it's to save a child who is suffering from leukemia, or the results of finding accidentally uncovering a landmine, all the way to feeding the hungry in a place like Atlanta. So there's this kind of effort all over the world, and especially with the Salvation Army in the United States, which raises on the order of something like $150 million or so every year just in the bucket. There is a problem with this, however, which is that it unleashes generosity. That's great, but there's no way to talk to these people and thank them afterwards. This is a theme I'm going to come back to as we talk today. This is another image that may be familiar to you, whether or not you've personally experienced dumping ice water over your head. If you're in the field of fundraising, you inevitably have seen people dump ice water over their heads in the Ice Bucket Challenge, which was held in 2014 to support the effort to address ALS, a debilitating neurological condition. The reason I'm mentioning this is because it allowed people everywhere to get excited about raising money right there in their own house on video for a cause that maybe they didn't have a lot of connection to before. So it empowered a lot of people to do good for others. And that's the good part about it. What we often fail to think about is the small number of individuals within the big crowd who can actually make the biggest impact on that work. You may recognize this guy, and in fact, if you want to mention it in the chat, let me just do a little visual test here, see if you're watching my slides. Anybody know who this is? Feel free to go ahead and write it. Hey, Billy, you're right, Bill Gates. Not everybody's favorite guy, but he's certainly been extremely generous through the foundation. And in this case, he was dumping ice water on his head as part of the ALS challenge. And this had something like 8 million views on YouTube. The main reason I'm mentioning it, though, is not about Bill Gates. It's to say that in that bigger crowd, there's inevitably 1 out of 100 people who are in a position financially, as well as, their connection to the cause to do something big with you. Doing that is really what we want to make sure we spend some time talking about today. And so our agenda is to first uncover the major sources of support that are available to you. Then learn what free and low-cost tools and techniques are available to even the smallest organizations so you can identify and understand potential major donors. Again, a lot of the focus on the tools in this slide deck happen to be US focused. Please don't go away if you're at another part of the world. I'll try to provide a little bit of context globally, and I can certainly do that afterwards. But we're also going to talk about the ways you can build real, lasting, rewarding relationships with prospective major donors wherever you are. So this is going to be a presentation I hope will bring you benefit. I'm also going to move as quickly as I can, not only because we only have so much time and I've got a lot of content, but because some of it will be well known to you. You'll say, well, so what? I knew that already. Other things may be very unknown to you, or you may even be skeptical about these approaches. I want to encourage you to at least be open to them, and then feel free to debate with me, both in the Q&A at the end and offline later. I think it's really important in fundraising that we not get too locked into particular sets of ideas about how to do things, because our field is constantly changing. And in fact, we're really, as a new, as a profession, if you will, really only about 120 years old in the way that we are today. Sure, there has been philanthropy everywhere, in every corner of the world since the dawn of time. Personally, in my own work, I've been looking at it a lot through a lens of Asia, because that's a particular interest of mine and my family's. And you can look at giving in Japan, for example, that goes back at least 700 years. That doesn't mean that people weren't giving before. That's just the easiest time to document it. Well, that's a lot older than the place where I'm presenting from, the United States. So I'm constantly making myself aware that wherever we live, the little puddle that we inhabit is only one small part of the world. So I hope that you'll take all this information that we share today and view it as a way to open up your opportunities to find people who have resources and passion for what you do, and you can build relationships with them to raise more money tomorrow. And I would start typically by asking you, hey, so what's your name and where do you work? And in fact, some of you told us where you're from, including Minnesota. Thank you for that. So that's good. We can't do that today because there are too many people in the room. But what I would like to do is launch a couple of little polls to get a sense about who's in this room and give you a sense about it. So we have the first poll, and Jenna, I think you're going to launch these. Is that right? So here's the first one. So I'm asking you what kind of work your organization does. By the way, if you're wondering, what do these terms even mean? Like public society benefit? These are terms that are applied to the work of the Giving Institute in the United States, which produces a book called Giving USA. There are different studies about giving around the world, including the work done at Johns Hopkins University and also at the UN. But this is framed around those terms used in Giving USA, which is a big, an important book documenting giving in the United States. So I thought it'd be helpful to say, well, who's in the room? What kind of organizations do you work at? So let's see. We've got answers from 64% of the audience. Let's see if we can get those numbers up a little bit. Come on. This is going to be helpful. If you're not sure, that's okay. Just make your best guess. And right now, if this were a horse race, we'd see that at 77% of the audience, we've got about 41% in health or human services. As you can see, 24% in education or religion, 18% arts, culture, and humanities, etc. So it kind of gives you a sense about the kind of work that people are doing in our little group today. Let me ask you if we can switch over to the next poll, how large your organizational budget is. This one's going to be quicker to answer for most of you. And now, Jenna told me before we started she had to compress some of these a little bit. So if you find yourself as an organization that does less than $100,000 next to an organization doing $250,000 US dollars, I should have said that you might feel like a small fish in a big pond. Please don't feel that way. It's just to give us some context. So what we've got right now is that with 77% of the audience answering, as you can see, we've got 65% of the audience in organizations doing less than $250,000 US dollars. By the way, if we looked at just the US marketplace for philanthropy, we'd see that about 95% plus of the organizations would be less than $1 million. So it's not uncommon. There's a long tail phenomena to many things, whether it's social media, in other words, a few people talking and a lot of people listening, or whether it's something like fundraising, where with the organizations themselves, there are a few that are very large and then a lot that are smaller, or in the case of giving, a few people who have the financial capacity and the interest to give extraordinary amounts, and then a lot of people who provide some other kind of general and very important support, but are not in a position to make a major gift. I'm going to go back to this throughout the presentation, but I thought it'd be helpful to see who's in the room first. Now, question is, what do you want to know? So if you would, in the chat, why don't you just go ahead and start to list those questions, if only to get our juices flowing, so when we get to the Q&A, we can address some of the questions that you have. We don't have to address all of them, and we don't have to address all of them today, but I want to make sure that you are heard and that you hear one another. That's really important, because the question that you have that's unuttered, somebody else may be thinking about it in a different part of the world. Those questions are all vital to what we do. So go ahead and start listing those questions about what you want to take from this presentation today, and I'll make sure I keep kind of a side eye on that and in my peripheral vision throughout. So we'll go ahead and tackle those again throughout the presentation today. Thank you for starting to list those, Isabella and Rose and others. We appreciate you. Now, I'm going to touch first on the Philanthropic Marketplace, and that's who gives to whom and what do they have in common. And I'm going to start with a lens looking at primarily the US market, because it's so well documented through Giving USA, and those results were just released. But in fact, country to country, there are differences, but a couple of things I'm going to mention are fairly consistent. So I'm going to start with just, has charitable giving gone up or down during the last year? If I were asking you that question, we'd have all different sorts of answers. I'm going to show you exactly what happened this last year. Another, especially given the pandemic. Another thing you might ask is, well, who's responsible for most of the philanthropic giving in America? And the reason I ask it that way is because there's also a big flow of revenue that often comes from earned revenue. So whether it's a shop that you have or some other activity that you do that's an actual commercial activity. And then finally, there's often money that might come from the government. And that's included here in these possible responses, but oftentimes those government contracts are not considered philanthropy. Those are contracts, and that activity, while meritorious, may not be perceived the same way, and certainly not the same way by donors. And then finally, another question that often comes up is, what type of charitable activity is receiving the most support? The reason I'm asking these questions now, or framing these as a way to think about the marketplace for philanthropy, is because of what we just saw when we looked at this room. Who's here? Where do what kinds of organizations do you work in? So in other words, where's the money flowing? And also, have you seen money come up or down? That'll be important to know. So we're going to take a look at those things right now. We're going to start right now with the picture of Giving USA's results. And you can get all this from the Giving Institute. You can look that up later. And in 2019, which is the most recent year for which they have data, you can see that the numbers are pretty staggering. $449 billion in change, or $450 billion in change to charity in the form of philanthropy. This is not including earned revenue or contracts, just giving. And of that, 69%, actually a little bit of a decline, comes from individuals. But giving by foundations was 17% of the pie, and at least half of that is from foundations which are controlled by an individual or family members. So it's not the Rockefeller Foundation, formed decades and decades ago, where there might be some members of the family serving on the board, but it's an independent, very well-structured organization that's making decisions by staff. And so you've got 69% individuals saying, I want to make a contribution to the cause, maybe another half of the foundation money being in the same form, giving by bequest, or in other words, in our estates or in our wills at the time of death. That's 10% of the pie. That's all individuals. So actually, when you put it all together, help me do the math, so 70, 80, we're closing in on 86 to 87% of the money or plus coming from individuals. And I know this is not very surprising, especially for those in the United States who look at these numbers every year, but we have to constantly remind ourselves of this, because while corporations can be generous, they are thinking primarily about the bottom line, their stakeholders and their shareholders. While foundations can be very generous, they're often very structured entities that take a long time to make a decision. It might be 18 months or so before a decision is rendered, and those grant amounts can sometimes be very large, but oftentimes they are not. And their giving program is again highly structured. Versus, if I asked you to support a cause that's meaningful to you, you could give to the extent of your ability to give if you were engaged and you really cared, and I asked you the right way, at the right time, about the right things. That's really the focus here of much of what I'm going to be talking about today, is the individual, because quite frankly, that's where the money is, and that's where the flexibility is. And that's what we often don't exercise. The other thing we should keep in mind is that while giving does track with the Standard & Poor's or other financial measures around the world, giving during recessions, while it does decline, we do see that it does come back up over time. One thing, however, that we can adjust for, and you'll hear me talk about this throughout, is that if we treat people right, if we treat people as human beings rather than as automatic teller machines or banking machines, we will find that they are more responsive over time, that we can sustain the relationships with them because they will feel invested in co-authoring the destiny of our work, instead of feeling like they're just being asked to give stuff away. And so whether the economy is good or bad, we can retain those donors. Often, however, what nonprofits have failed to do is maintain relationships. So a big focus of our discussion here and in the future will be about that. How do we retain relationships once we've discovered people who have an interest in the cause and have resources to give? Because if we treat them like they're just banking machines, inevitably we will lose them. And that's not just an idea in my head. We have seen in the United States, for example, a place where there's a very large profession of fundraising, which generates a lot of the philanthropic activity, that we have seen a decline in the past 20 years, about 2/3 of my professional life. We've seen a decline from about 70% of the US population giving to about 55.3%. But what happened last year is interesting and indicative of what is possible, which is that when times are tough, people really come forward and help. And they especially help people in need if we ask the right ways in a sincere way. So we're going to be talking about that again throughout. Wealth is unequal and giving is unequal. And this is a concept that it's also embedded in the next section, which is about where the money is. So I put up two pyramids here to represent that. The one on the left, it comes from Credit Suisse, one of many financial companies that measure how wealth and income is distributed around the world. I especially look at wealth because wealth is where people draw major gifts from versus income, which is where they tend to draw little, kind of over the transom gifts from. So wealth is really the repository, the place from which people can make substantial investments and change. And if you want to look at the world, you can see that there's fewer than, according to this chart, which was back in 2017, so it's a little old now, there were 140,000 people who had over $50 million in investable assets on the face of the earth. Only 25% of those were in the United States, by the way. So that means that 75% were around the world. So this is not just a chart of the US, this is a chart of the world. The chart on the right, however, is a gift pyramid from a campaign that was at one of many organizations, that decided, I think it was a school in this case, they needed to raise some money. They needed to figure out how many gifts from how many people were going to help them make their goal. And so what they did was they did a distribution. And they don't always look exactly like this, but they often do, where they found that maybe one person was going to give as much as 15 to 25% of the money. And then two people were going to give maybe 10%. And then another four people were going to give a certain amount, et cetera. So the distribution follows where there is capacity, financial capacity, and interest that has been built over time through relationships. Again, if this is really obvious to you, I apologize for that. I hope at least reinforces the idea that we have to go where there's resources, but we also have to build relationships in order to allow people the opportunity to invest in the things that matter to them, and most importantly, to us and our communities. And that's, again, embedded in this whole thing. We could talk all day about what happened in the pandemic and what's happening in the pandemic around the world. So before I say one more word, I want to just say quite sincerely that I hope that you and your families are safe. That this is a time we're still struggling with, and I realize we're in a very privileged position in the United States because of distribution of vaccine. We are not out of the woods here, but we are in a much better position in terms of vaccination rates than in many parts of the world where vaccines haven't reached everyone. So I hope that that you are finding yourself safe and that you are able to do your work safely for the communities that you serve. One thing that we do know is that some people have made tremendous profits at this time, not in an inappropriate way, but they have served the community in everything from food distribution to providing services online. And so some people have made a tremendous amount of money, while many people have had financial hardship. What that means net, in the end, is that there are people sitting on resources right now who are trying to give them away. A great example of this is Mackenzie Scott, a name you might know, who is the former spouse of the founder of Amazon, which is a company I'm sure everyone here recognizes. And she has been giving away money as fast as she possibly can. But because Amazon stock has gone up in the last 24 hours, for example, the $600 million I think she's given away just recently has been eclipsed by the profits that she's made on the stock that she's trying desperately to give away. So I'm not saying this to say, oh boy, all those rich people are also generous, nor am I saying those rich people have to give their money away. I'm just trying to look at this as economic reality. There are some people who have a lot of money. They also care about things like we do. Let's find a way to bring us together. I'm going to show you some pictures quickly to make a point. This is a place not far from where I used to live, where there were smokestacks, and that was an indication of where the money was. In many parts of the world, and certainly in the United States, you don't look for the smokestacks to determine where the money's being made anymore. you might look at a building like this. And if you don't recognize it, and that wouldn't surprise you if you didn't, this is the headquarters of Apple in the United States, a very successful company. You might have an iPhone in your hand right now, but it's an unremarkable building. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because you wouldn't look at this from a Google image or by driving down the street and say, wow, that's where the money is. Similarly, this house, sorry it's a little obscured in my image here, is something called the Breakers, which is Newport, Rhode Island. It was a number of these summer cottages. Yes, I'm emphasizing the word cottages, where people lived, these very extraordinarily wealthy people lived in Newport, Rhode Island at the turn of the last century in the United States. And the cleaning bills and the food bills were pretty extraordinary in these places. They had dozens or hundreds of rooms to just summer in this place. Anyway, you'd look at a house like this and you'd think, well, you know what? To have a house like that, you'd have to be pretty rich. But if you look at a house like this, I don't know about you, but I don't think, wow, they must be loaded. But this house, I think, sold for around $2.6 million in the Bay Area of San Francisco not long ago. And while it's a little bigger than it looks because there's an apartment in back, so it's 3,000 square feet. Sorry, I'm not converting the metric for those who are more enlightened than I am. But anyway, this house is not a pretty picture, but it sure was worth a heck of a lot of money, and you wouldn't know it by driving down the street. Similarly, this is a picture of a bunch of guys, definitely all guys, mostly decked out, all white guys at the turn of the, well, not the turn of the last century, but close to it, in New York. A lot of them wearing top hats or bowlers, a couple with caps who managed to sneak their way into the picture. And the man in the middle, who looks a little bit like our image of Santa Claus, is actually Andrew Carnegie. And thank you for the metric conversion. I appreciate that. Anyway, Andrew Carnegie, who did a lot of things charitably after he made a tremendous amount of money, did show up in this picture looking, well, of course, as rich as he in fact was. But if you looked at these guys, there's a man who owns a pizza joint, one who's a local mayor, and one there wearing that hat and a really awful loud shirt that's definitely not a Hawaiian shirt. It's a knockoff. That is one of the 26 richest people in America and the 75 richest people in the world. Ray Dalio, head of a hedge fund in Greenwich, Connecticut. You'd never know by looking at this guy that he was rich. And that's my point. You cannot judge people by zip codes or, where they live. You can't judge them by the cars they drive. You definitely can't judge them by their YouTube videos showing their great yacht and people looking gorgeous in bathing suits sitting on their yachts. A lot of that is very, very much manufactured, just like Instagram pictures of people hanging on cliff edges and hopefully not falling off. There's a lot of beauty and fun in that, not a lot of money. We're going to show you where the money is right now. There was a 6 markers of philanthropy study done by a company, Donor Search, which I am connected to. I host a series of webinars for them. And other kinds of content, all free, by the way. So after you're done looking at the great content here at Donorbox, feel free to go over there and check out some of the things we've done over at Donor Search. But I do all the non-commercial content hosting there. But they did a great study of U.S. organizations and the money that they had brought in and where it came from. They looked at $685 million in giving in a single year, I think it was, from 1 million individuals to 400 nonprofits. And they said, what do these people have in common? Well, first of all, giving to your organization. And you can find that by simply looking in your database if you have one. If you don't, I think you know today where you can get one. The main point here is to do a recency, frequency, money analysis. So I want to suggest to you that if you haven't done something like this in the past, just go ahead and look it up afterwards because we won't have time to talk about it today. But it basically boils down to this. Coding, maybe from 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, how recently somebody is given to you, how frequently someone gives to you, and how much cumulatively someone has given to your organization. And then add up those codes, and then you can do a quick sorting to determine who has the highest RFM. And that's one measure, just one, but one measure that might be helpful to figure out where do we start, who might be the best opportunity there. Another one is giving to other organizations. Now, this is hard around the world. There are databases like this, and in fact, I have a list I'll show you in a few minutes. I'm glad I included that in this presentation. But for those in the US, you're going to be able to do this. You're going to be able to go on to DS Giving. That's DSGIVING, dsgiving.com, and look up a person and then see political or charitable giving if it's been recorded. Political giving should be. Charitable giving might be. There are over 250 million gift records here. So you can look up a person, see how much they've given. Giving to other organizations is highly indicative of their ability and willingness to give to you. Board of trustee positions. We found that there might be only 2% of your database, of the people who have given to you and care about your organization, who sit on a board or in a trustee position for nonprofits or foundations. But those people are likely to be giving as much as 4 times as much as any other donor. So find those people, and you can often find a source of revenue. And if you were to use, oh, thank you for including that right there. If you were to look in the US for this kind of information, there is information like this around the world, fortunately. You can see nonprofit leadership available right there from a source called Candid. I'm trying to make sure I can remove this on my screen. So there, I can close it. So nonprofit leadership could be measured by looking at a database called GuideStar, and there are international versions of that, by the way, or there might be more localized or regional or national version of a database of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, not-for-profit organizations, charitable organizations, CSOs. They're called by different names. Here, using the Candid database and the GuideStar database, which is free, you can go in and look up any organization, you can see who's on the board, and you can look up more information about them. Similarly, you can go and look at foundations. Now that you often have to pay for, but not always. Depending upon where you are, which country you're in, some of those databases are free. They're not always comprehensive, but they're often free. And so I'll have some resources on that in a few minutes. But that is available through Candid as well, and there's a kind of a layer of free data there for us in the United States. On political giving, that information varies widely about its transparency around the world, but here in the United States, Open Secrets is a source that you can use. OpenSecrets.org, you can go and you can look up an individual campaign, you can look up by state, you can look up by donor, and you can get a list of all these people. Very helpful to know. Not necessarily for political inclination, and definitely not in order to acquire donors, but to research people who are already giving to you. And that's important to know what the legal ramifications are of acquisition versus research. But I just wanted to mention that that's a resource for you to look at. It's very helpful and it's free. Another thing that you might want to consider, and it's usually the easiest thing to look up, is real estate. Now, again, globally, it's different from domestically. In the United States, you can look up any of this real estate information from free resources like Zillow or Realtor.com, other things of that nature, all the way to more expensive resources like LexisNexis and others that are very robust and will show multiple properties. But the reason I'm mentioning this is because in the United States, for example, about 65% of the population has their name on the title to a house. But that doesn't necessarily mean they have a lot of money because people will often have a mortgage or they'll own debt to a bank. So what I'm mentioning here is just that they're connected to a property. And it begins to tell you a little bit about them. And that information is, again, public. Everything I'm talking about is public data. And so, how is this meaningful? Well, as you can see here in the slide, individuals owning in the United States more than $2 million worth of real estate are in the top 3.5% of your donor pool and are giving you nearly 1/3 of your donations already. It's already happening. So the question is, do you know who they are? And that's something that you can look at then and find the people who aren't giving at that level in order to increase the request amount. Or better yet, start to develop a relationship and then a strategy around them and then a solicitation for them. You can find some single multiple property data, as I mentioned, in sources like Zillow, and also multiple properties through something like Netro Online. So again, this slide deck is available to you. A recording of this is being made if I'm going kind of fast. And there are other resources that might be of interest to you as well. I also want to mention business affiliation. This is a big deal because The people who have their name associated with a business in the executive level, either as an owner of a private company or an executive, an insider at a public company, can be extraordinarily wealthy and especially have done well when their businesses did well in this last year or a year and a half. What does this mean? And this is true globally, although the percentages change a little bit from country to country, region to region, which is that the richer someone is, the more likely most of their wealth is held in the form of stock. So it's typically stock, real estate, private business. And sometimes those two secondary characteristics, private business and real estate, will flip as the person becomes wealthier. So real estate becomes subordinated to private business. Why am I mentioning this? Because you can find out a lot about people's private businesses. In the United States, for example, there are 30 million private businesses, but 80% of those have no employees, and only 0.1% have over 500 employees. So just 7% of full-time businesses generated over $1 million in annual revenue, which is another way of saying a lot of people doing business, but they're working their tails off to try and make a living for their families. It doesn't mean that they're in a position to give to you because they're trying to build their business and support their family. As you can see, if you look at household income by small business owners, right here, you can see that that only 2% are earning over $200,000 a year. This is all U.S. figures. But you can get some information on private business owners, even though that information is private. They don't have to share it. But you can get a little bit of it. Domestically here in the U.S., you can get it through things like Dun & Bradstreet, Hoover's. There's another one called Granta, I think it is. Their company websites, business media like Inc. magazine, etc. On public companies, which are much smaller, there may only be 10 to 12,000 of those total. You're looking at databases ranging from Forbes to Statista, where there's a lot of free information on both a national and a regional and even a local basis that'll be very instructive for you. But there's a way you can go even deeper, and that's insiders in the stock market. So here, you could go and look up public company insiders. These are the people who either are directors and officers with policymaking functions or people who own over 10% of any class of stock in the company or own founder stock in the company. That group of people is hundreds of thousands of people, but those are the people who did so well when the stock market has climbed to all-time highs here in the United States and in many parts of the world. What information is available on these people? Compensation, stock holdings. They're giving through philanthropic entities like foundations and trusts associated with their names. Biographical information like their career, their education, their age, and their other affiliations. Lots of really interesting information on a very small pool of people. So do you remember the pyramids that I showed you? These are the people at the very top of the pyramid. And this information is all public because it has to be by law. So I'm going to show you a few images for what you can get in the US, knowing that, again, for some of you, this will seem abstract. Please stick with me. Some of this information will be available to you globally, and I can talk with you offline about ways to get some of that. Not all of it, but some of it. And it varies from country to country about transparency. So here in the US, you can use CNBC, cnbc.com, to go up and look up a company like Stryker Corp. Okay, but it could be anything, Apple or Amazon or whatever company you want. And you can see how the company's doing, which in this case, you can see Stryker did quite well in the last year. You could then see who are the major shareholders, the insiders, by simply clicking on insider holdings. And then you'd see a list of all the current insiders and what their holdings are at this present time, as well as their transactions. But if you wanted to go deeper, you could go to the SEC site. This is the Securities and Exchange Commission, sec.gov, and you could go in there and you could look up any company by their name, and then you could go and look for the forms that are their proxy forms. You can see that here right here. Click on that, and then you could see the whole proxy document, or a document that is for shareholders but is shared and disclosed by law to the rest of the world, so we know how the company's doing and what it's doing because it's a public company. And so there's a lot of information there, including faces of people. Sometimes helpful to know what a person looks like, how old they are, where they work, what other kinds of things they do, what other boards they serve on. All of that information could be instructive, as well as their compensation information. So this is, again, only on a small group of people at the very top of the pyramid. And everything we've been looking at when I looked at all these people from this study are probably in the top 3% of your own database. So if you have a database that's made up of people giving from throughout the region or the country or around the world, you're likely to find that a very small proportion of those people have significant assets, and they're just as interested as everybody else in your database. So while we want to show the love to all, involve them all in ways that are meaningful to them, we want to make sure we identify the people who are sitting back there wondering, why haven't they called me? And I know this sounds ridiculous, but they are saying that. So I still remember going to a conference years ago where someone said, the day I made my money, meaning that when they took their company public, that they had received 100 phone calls that day, 100 phone calls, but not one was from the universities they had attended. Not one was from any of the charities they supported. Now, I'm not blaming us in our world for that, because we didn't have that information. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know where to look. We were busy. We're under-resourced. We're underpaid. We're working like crazy. But you know what? We can be more efficient and effective for ourselves, for those we serve, for the communities that we support, by simply doing a little bit of research. And this kind of research will help us focus in on a few people who could make extraordinary gifts. And just imagine what it would mean if instead of, I don't know, a $100 million gift going to Harvard University or something, and I have nothing against Harvard, it's a great place, but if instead of a $100 million gift going to some endowment at Harvard, instead it could go to feed, 1 million children somewhere right now. What is separating that? Relationship, identification and relationship built over time, a trust, so that they know that they can provide a big gift to your organization or a collection of organizations and make real change happen. They know that if they give the money to Harvard, first of all, they built a relationship over the years. So they know what's going to happen if they give the money to Harvard. It's going to sit in an account, provide scholarships, so they can trust what's going to happen. And so they know exactly what's happening, but they don't necessarily know that with you. So we need to find them, and we need to build that relationship of trust, and we need to provide them a project at scale to make the kind of change we want to see in the world, and then make them excited about it. All those things are possible if we really want to make the change we want to see in our communities. These tools that I have on the screen right now are all around the world providing these kinds of data. These are all for a fee. Everything I just showed you was free. But I would encourage you to take a look at some of these and see if any of them would provide you an avenue to understanding, to first identifying and then researching and understanding the people in your database right now, as well as maybe finding some new people. Now, have I lost you? Are you still with me? Is this, am I blowing your minds or putting you to sleep? Feel free to tell me in the chat. How can you build trust with a donor when you're starting a nonprofit? Thank you, Deidre, for telling me you're still here. This is something I'm going to be talking about right now. So I want to make sure that as long as your minds aren't literally exploding, that we are going to give you some tools you can use right now to build these relationships. That's best practices in major gifts for smaller nonprofits. So here we go. First of all, I want to say this. The most obvious thing in the world is the thing we never seem to do, which is, if you don't recognize this machine, it's an ATM machine. I just want to say what I say every day. This is not a donor. If we just keep asking people for money without knowing anything about who they are, then they will get tired and they will break, just like a machine will, or they will run out of money, or they will giving it to lots of other people instead of us. And it's because we ought to think like the donor. Whether that donor is a $25 donor or a $25 million donor, they're a human being who want to make their life meaningful while they live. And we can make the difference. You can call this donor-centered, you can call it human-centered, you can say whatever you want, but I just want to treat people nicely. And the best way to do that is to treat them like people we care about, and that's family, instead of treating them as somehow otherworldly. And that includes people who have a lot of money. Because while we may or may not like the way they made it, and in fact, we may want to have very specific rules and policies and procedures on what gifts we will accept and from whom, I would strongly encourage that. That with that provision, that in every other way, these are other human beings who just happen to have more money. The difference between what we do right now and what we could do is that we could let them invest in the things that are meaningful to the communities we serve. So there are three types of individual gifts. One is an annual or sustaining gift, right? It's a gift that's made in response to, let's say, a direct mail appeal or something we do over social media or an email. And that source is typically income. But that can be kind of exhausting if we never do anything other than just ask people for money and rarely even thank them properly. And we could do a whole session on thanking, but let me just say this. Please thank people repeatedly and sincerely. Please. Because it works. I mean, it not only is the right thing to do, but it works. It actually builds sustained revenue. So it makes us good people, and it also means there's more money coming in. And by the way, this isn't just something we do to treat rich people. This is something we do to treat every person. So whether it's a $5 donor or a $5 million donor, I would like to see us doing a handwritten note when we can, picking up the phone, sending a note, putting something on Twitter saying that this person is awesome. Whatever works, whatever is good for them and for us and for the community we serve, that's what we want to do. But that is really typically from income, meaning that whatever I earned this month, I can make a little bit of distribution. That's not the same as a major gift, which we're focusing on today. Those are 10 to 25 times typically the annual gift amount, and they're coming typically from assets. There are also these lifetime gifts when people decide, you know what, I'm going to die at some time, and so I'm going to make a provision for these things that really matter to me and to my family. This is how I want to be remembered. And those are very important, and we could spend a lot of time on that. But today I'm focusing on the middle, and it's coming from assets. The way we build those relationships in a real way is by identifying people. That's what we spent time on right now. Qualifying people, which you can do with the information we just collected. Cultivating relationships with people, and then asking them. You got to do both. You can't just, as one person I used to work with said, aim, 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 and never fire, or just fire, fire, fire indiscriminately. You've got to build a relationship and then invite them to participate and then thank them repeatedly to show them that you actually care about them as real human beings. That is the cycle of life. That is the circle that we want to follow that makes this perpetual, not just for revenue, but for building real relationships with people who act as our ambassadors. And it comes from the center of what might be described as the golden circle. There's a great presentation by Simon Sinek that you'll find that he did a TED Talk on. I want to encourage you to look at that, where he talks about the why. So it's not about what we do or how we do it. It's why we do it that resonates for people. It's that which is the sympathetic vibration we want to instill. How do we do that? We do it through a case statement. A powerful case is concerned with a cause, not just the, these are the things we do and you should give to us. These are the needs of the organization. That's not inspiring. What's inspiring is the vision that we have for how we're going to change the world. Or as it's been said by Jerry Panis, the late great Jerry Panis, who has taught a lot of us in fundraising, that the case statement, and in fact all of our work, is about changing lives or saving lives. So if we write anything, whether it's a direct mail appeal or an email, or we talk to someone in an elevator, or we write a case statement that helps us develop a conversation, we want to remember it's about changing lives and saving lives. And we use that case statement as a tool for measuring interest of people in our work, setting appointments with individuals to discuss a way for them to participate in the work, and even to figure out how much money you can raise towards a particular goal. That's how case statements are typically used. But then they're also used to facilitate the ask. Because once we've internalized that statement about why we're here and what the need is, not our need as an organization, but the need of the community and the need of the donor, where that is paired, that's where we often get into trouble. And that's where often people feel like they've got a chicken bone stuck in their throat and when they try to ask people for money. So here are a few steps to get beyond that. First of all, when you're thinking about setting up a visit, to visit with someone and just talk, then I would suggest sending a letter, which can be done by email or physical letter in advance, setting a time and date and place for a call, and then practicing, reviewing your calendar and keeping it handy, standing up, which I'm not doing. My voice would be so much better if I were standing. And we all know this. If you pick up the phone and you stand up and talk, your voice resonates and it just sounds warmer. If you smile, it sounds so much warmer. We can hear when people do these things. So if you take these steps and remember not to solicit, but just to invite people to talk, that is key. The next step you would do is set up a meeting to listen. Most fundraising is about listening, not asking. 80% of the work is done by finding people, understanding people, listening to people, facilitating a conversation around the why, and then finally asking them. Don't put it off forever, But since we're focusing now on the top 3% of the people who have the passion and the propensity and the wherewithal, the finances to give, now every single conversation is leading you to a place where you can make an extraordinary impact. So if your organization is under $250,000, that's 70% of us here today, imagine what would happen if you found the 3 out of 100 people in your database, the 3 out of 100 people who care about your work, who are in a position to underwrite your entire budget. That's what we're talking about. And in order to make that happen, we not only have to do the research, and we not only have to know what we're asking about, the why, but we have to listen to people first before we ask. Then when we're going to do that, we want to present an opportunity. This is the thing that we've been talking about. You can tell them why you support the work, because and by the way, even though I think all of us are working at nonprofits, we want to make sure we're giving. I mean, actually financially giving to organizations, because donors can just smell it if we're not. But anyway, we can tell people why we give. We can ask people to consider a gift. And you know, would you consider a gift of $50,000 to this project that you've told me that you want to give to? You know, reiterating what we have heard them say, and then just be quiet and let the person think. And if they do have objections or concerns, those are our best friends. It allows us to facilitate a conversation. And finally, if it doesn't work, if you ask and it doesn't take you where you want it to go, why could that be? Well, maybe it's because of any of these things, but especially, and then most often, it's because you didn't ask. And what I find is that often people have these conversations when they get to this point, and they never just lean forward and say, would you consider a gift of X to do Y? And that conversation and that question being informed by what the person has already told you they want to do, marrying the ideas of the need of the community to the needs of the individual, to self-actualize, to give agency, to make the world a better place. Now, there is a strategy you can apply to this. I'm going to do this super fast. I would select 10 to 25 of the best opportunities you find by doing this kind of research. Then I'd collect easy to access research on each. I'd identify a natural partner or a person who knows the person in some way or is a peer of the person. And I'd sit down with that person and I'd develop a strategy, okay? Consult with them and develop a strategy. That's the development phase. And I'd plan maybe 7 steps that I'd be taking or moves, 7 steps or moves to be taking with each person. And then I would implement those steps or moves and record what happens every time I have a phone call or a personal visit. And I'd refine what's happening along the path. Just like if I were taking a road trip with my spouse or with a friend and I needed to revise a little bit because that river was flooded or that hotel was closed. That way I can fine-tune the planning for each move. And always keep the destination in mind. Periodically review the status of each and every donor, refine your strategies and objectives, and add and delete opportunities from your portfolio or the list of people, those 10 to 25, as you see appropriate. Because some people will simply not want to give and other people will. And I know I've talked a lot at you today, but I want to end with this idea. If you retained anything I've said, and you are still fighting with some of the concepts, which is very natural if you are, I would say this: please fight the automatic negative thoughts, the ants that might block you from what you do. The things where you say to yourself, we've never done it that way, or I can't do that. It doesn't work for our kind of organization. That's too much money. We've been doing all right without doing that. We're too busy. Let's do that later. These are all the impediments we put up in front of our own success. And I would argue also the success of the 2 things that are more important than our personal success. One is the needs of our community to get the resources it requires in order to go from where they are to where they need to be. And the other is some donor sitting somewhere wondering, well, I've got this money. I don't really know what to do with it. All I know is I'm going to die. And someday what I'd like to see is a world that's a little better than the world I came into. We can bring those 2 together. That's our job if we can just take these ants and put them out of our mind. So, Jenna, was that fast enough?
Okay, here I am. Wow. Very speedy, but very informative and inspiring. I hope that all of you are feeling like you got some affirmations. Yes, I did know this. And also found some new ways to look at this. I certainly did. Thank you so much, Jay, for this. Something that really resonates with me. And I say this all the time. If you don't ask, the answer is always no. It's my favorite quote ever. I apply it to everything. Please take Jay's words of wisdom and apply them to your nonprofit. And he's got big ideas and you've got a big mission, and I have no doubt that you can make a huge impact. Now, before I go into Q&A, I know we are a little short on time. I have a quick announcement for all of you. I want to announce that Donorbox has launched an online platform called the Donorbox Knowledge Community. This is an amazing place where you can connect with like-minded individuals and nonprofit professionals to get focused answers to your questions regarding anything nonprofit, marketing, web development, fundraising, board management, volunteer management, and so much more. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. And I want to know if you are already part of the Donorbox knowledge community, and you will see why I'm asking this in just a minute. See how I strategically place these answers? Yes, no, but I want to join. Well, I see that we have gotten 58% of the audience answering, and a lot of folks who have the opportunity to join. And here, this is where we're going to post the recording of the webinar and all the wonderful resources for you to use. All right, now, I'm going to go ahead and go back to our questions. We had some really great questions right at the beginning, and you answered a lot of them. So I'm going to scroll through a couple of my favorites here, really insightful questions. And we got loads. Bear with me. Okay. I love this question. How do you get past the foundation gatekeeper notice that they do not accept unsolicited donor requests?
Yeah, I love this question. And I want to start by saying my first real job was giving away money. So, and I know I'm ancient now, but I want to tell you, I think this is still true now, which is that I would still pick up the phone and call. Or if you're more comfortable doing it, I'd send a note and then I would call. And I would use every opportunity to talk to everyone at every time to learn. So in other words, you're not trying to send anybody anything. You're trying to find out whether or not there's an opportunity there. And so the places that say they don't accept unsolicited requests for support just means they haven't asked you. So we want to get in a position where they will invite you to submit a proposal. And I love talking to people because I'll learn things. I mean, there's every day I learn the volume of my ignorance, which is massive and expanding like the universe. And the thing about the foundation world is that think about them in a sense like librarians. Everybody is besieging them, right? They all want something from them instead of just asking them for their advice. So I think that the oldest line in fundraising, which is so true, is ask for advice, get money, ask for money, get advice. So with foundations, it's no different. I would ask them for advice on whether or not this is the kind of project is appealing, who it might appeal to, what other kinds of places you'd go, how would they approach this. I think it's a wonderful way to do it. So submit a letter of inquiry, as Jedediah is saying, absolutely. But I would say never fear the phone. And for those who are here, there's kind of a generational shift about how we communicate. I would say what's most important is finding the method of communication that works best for the person on the receiving end of the communication. So whether that's text or social media or phone, we use that. We use what's best for them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that answer. And again, that was such a great question. So we are at time, everybody. We have loads of questions that we would love to answer. So what we are going to do is direct you to the Donorbox Knowledge community. There you can join, you can post your questions for the Donorbox community managers to answer, for Jay to answer. We also have a whole slew of nonprofit professionals that can also chime in with their own experiences and their expertise. So go ahead and click that button and join. And Jay, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today to share your expertise with such passion. And again, that element of humor, which I always appreciate. And everyone, thank you for attending this webinar. And thank you for all that you are doing for your community and beyond. We are so pleased to provide the tools and resources you need to help you help others.
Thank you, Jenna. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in the community.